Okay, welcome to Don Stacy's YouTube channel. I'm going to continue reading from my unpublished novel, The Impressionist. I'm going to have to backtrack a little bit because last segment got cut off before it was completed, the reading. For any mature adult, 5 years, the very thought of 5 years, seems like quite a stretch of time. For the rapidly growing Patrick Youngers, 5 years now measured the entire span of his life so far. 5 years. As would be expected, a considerable amount of change had occurred in the lives of all the individuals involved in this lengthy tale. Of all the people you have come to know here, attentively kind and persistent reader, Jack Bayfield had undergone the most thoroughgoing transformation. Owing to both years-long dedicated preparation and, not to mention, plain good luck, Jack's career in show business had finally begun to soar. By this time, his name had become a household word. Critics compared him favorably to George Carlin, the sly satirist who, from the 70s of the previous century until his death, the age of 71, dominated stand-up comedy, and in doing so set a high bar for wit, imagination, and an energized, emphatic delivery. Jack's agent, T-Bone Jefferson, could not have been happier. Jack had become his premier client within a single year, and T-Bone had come to regard Jack as his golden goose. Nowadays, booking agents were clamoring for him. T-Bone's good fortune had flowed directly from Jack's sudden meteoric rise in the public's entertainment-starved consciousness. Jack had become a hot item, actively sought out by not only booking agents, but now and again, even a film director rep had contacted T-Bone about a 6-week to a 6-month window of opportunity, during which Jack might possibly be free to take up a role in a feature film. 2 years prior to this present time, Justine's mother, Deborah, passed away. The death of her mother had plunged Justine into a profound and lengthy period of grieving. A few times now, once again alone at her farmhouse, she was overcome by a deep, aching, relentless, crippling sorrow. Had it not been for Sheila and Bernie, she would not only have merely contemplated suicide, as she had already done on occasion several times, she surely would have committed the act and succeeded. Bernie and Sheila both had grown very concerned about her. They began to visit her far more often. Of course, her dog, Achilles, had to be euthanized. having developed severe arthritis as well as a horrible, ghastly-looking tumor just inside his lower jaw. For his part, Bernie had experienced nothing so extraordinary as Jack had done. Rather, he found himself thinking and reflecting in entirely new ways, nearly all of which had been inspired by his growing son, Patrick. He talked about this sometimes with Sheila, who knew precisely what he was talking about, having perceived this sensation within herself innumerable times since she first discovered that she had become pregnant. She understood her husband, of course, far better than anyone else, perhaps even himself. Fatherhood had thoroughly and fundamentally altered Bernie's inner life. With the birth of Patrick, his general disposition and orientation toward the world had undergone sweeping changes, especially after Patrick had first learned how to walk, then talk. With this followed by the busy little fellow's constant roaming throughout the apartment, propelled by the tyke's own ever-present curiosity. Sheila had begun talking about the two of them buying a house with a yard where Patrick could play outdoors in complete safety, where he could pedal his tricycle about in the driveway or along a stretch of sidewalk directly in front of the house, and she in turn could then remain free of anxiety over the possibility of her son being snatched away by some sick child predator. So by now, Bernie had begun to actively consider looking for a new position which would provide him with a substantial salary increase, enabling the two of them to obtain an affordable mortgage on a home. He browsed through the want ads in the paper each evening. He scoured the internet for possible leads on a job in the Seattle area. He believed his best shot would be in the field of public relations, and he soon began to send out resumes and letters of inquiry to all the public relations firms located in and around Seattle. He'd been with the Seattle Arts Commission for nearly 7 years now, and he felt with mounting conviction that he was due for a career change. The altercation. Next chapter. Theo and Sam had been bullshitting over the phone the other day while Theo was applying a stain to a bed frame he'd fashioned throughout the last 6 weeks. Taking his time, always preferring the work itself over the end result. Before they rang off, they made plans to meet at the Illinois, a large sports bar on Perry Street, where they hung out on an irregular basis, a pair of old gents shooting the endless breeze while slowly consuming a pitcher or two of beer. Presently, their glasses replenished from a brimming second pitcher the buxom Allison had just set down on the table for them a moment ago. They continued on with their conversation, all but ignoring the football game underway on the several oversized TV screens scattered about at each corner and along the middle of each wall within the large window-lit space of the bar. Say, did you ever finish up on that bed frame you'd been working on for who the fuck knows how long? Sam asked his friend. As a matter of fact, I did, Theo said. It's in Erica's bedroom now. I designed the headboard to have cabinet space for sheets and blankets. Motherfucker was a bitch to move. Erica had to help me, but she was happy enough that I'd build it for her. You getting along any better with her mother? We've managed to maintain a civil but maybe not cordial relationship, Theo said. But sometimes her remarks are so soaked in sarcasm, man. All I can do is bite my tongue and act like she hadn't just insulted me with her indirect, condescending, patronizing crap. Well, at least Erica isn't like that, buddy. Yeah, and I should be grateful because that wasn't always the case. When she and Jack started going out together, and especially after they got married, Erica acted like some high-born cunt for a long time, I swear to God. No shit, I didn't know that. Yeah, back in the day, she was pretty much like her mother is now, a fancy-ass, good-looking woman stuck on herself. Back when she and Jack were first married, I gave Erica a wide berth, man. Things have really changed. After a pause, Sam said, "Remember how Hillary Clinton was talking along the lines of 'It Takes a Village'?" Sure, that was the title of a book she wrote. Yeah, she was saying that a lot of different people play or should play a part in bringing up a kid. But the thing is, Theo, there ain't that many villages around anymore. At least not many that I've seen. You know, little burgs along the road strung out between two cities. People don't grow up in villages anymore. That's true, Sam, but don't forget the cities have been around for thousands of years, man. And besides, I'm pretty sure she meant that in a metaphorical sense, simply a loose network of people who flow in and out of any kid's life, beginning with their parents and teachers. Oh, well, if that's all she meant, hell, that ain't nothing new. Probably not. I never read her book, so I wouldn't know. If only the Democrats had picked Biden to run against Trump in 2016 instead of Hillary. Then we would have heard Biden tell that motherfucking Trump that much sooner to shut up during their first debate. The Republicans have turned into goddamn fascists, Theo. Theo nodded, looking steadily into his friend's eyes. The corporate donors to those right-wing politicians have their tentacles around everyone, those mindless motherfuckers. And that fucking Trump, he's the worst of the lot. From the adjacent booth just behind Theo, someone said, "Hey, old man, what are you crowing about? Did I hear you say some kind of bullshit about Trump?" Theo twisted around to have a look at the guy who just spoke, and now he was staring into the face of a man in his early 40s with a razor-trimmed beard, a buzz cut, and rounded cheeks. "Me and my buddy were talking about recent history, pal. Not that it's any of your business. You and I have a long-standing tradition of having political discussions, but I don't recall inviting you into our conversation when you sat down there a moment ago." Still looking at the man steadily now with a fixed gaze of contempt, he said, "If you don't like what you hear, then either ignore it or find it another fucking place to sit. I don't like your attitude, mister. Fuck off, you fat cunt. Why, you son of a bitch!" He began to hoist himself out from the booth as Theo slid quickly out from the table as Sam watched with both concern and amusement, while Theo now stood on the floor and released a pair of punches in quick succession into the man's face, battering his nose twice. This he then concluded with an uppercut to the bastard's stomach, causing him to collapse to the floor as he tried to suck air back into his lungs. A few feet away, a woman shrieked, startled by this violent outburst. Sam, now also on his feet, leaned toward Theo and with gruff urgency said, "Let's get the fuck out of here while we still can. That son of a bitch ain't gonna bother us now. You took care of him quick enough. Fuck, Theo." Jack buys a house in L.A. Having been frugal for far too long to squander his recent newfound wealth for any reason. His L.A. residence Jack settled on was a bungalow less than 2 miles from the traditional Hollywood studios such as Paramount or Warner Brothers. He believed correctly that he would have been a fool to make a large down payment on a multi-million-dollar mortgage just so he could have the hollow pleasure of sitting in a large and ostentatious 5-bedroom, uniquely designed home, which most people would find impressive. Besides, the furnishings for a 2-bedroom bungalow were far cheaper. He may not have fallen for the allure of the outer trappings of success in this instance, but Jack soon had become confronted by his own newfound celebrity, and particularly the interest of the fluidly mobile paparazzi. Jack regarded himself as too old now to dive into a street fight, but he'd been sorely tempted to do so in the persistent face of those more dedicated camera-wielding motherfuckers. But invariably on one of those occasions when Jack's path crossed an unusually determined member of the paparazzi, the mounting exasperation this guy was causing him soon ignited his temper, and he then threw himself into an ill-conceived scuffle, a shoving match during which the importuning photographer shouted threats of a lawsuit. But by this point, Jack's aggravation had made the psychic quantum leap to adrenaline-fueled outrage. Following one or two of Jack's clumsily delivered punches, the camera hound found himself sprawled out on the sidewalk. Following this incident, Jack's conduct earned him a derisive blurb in Vanity Fair, describing him as an ill-tempered brawler, as though that were the essence of his character. Someone had shown T-Bone the few paragraphs referencing Jack in Vanity Fair, and he cursed while thinking, I gotta have a talk with that motherfucker. Soon he called Jack to have a few words of warning for him. They had quite a chat. I don't know what the hell you were thinking, Bayfield. Lord have fucking mercy. You can't have the media talking shit about you, brother. That ain't gonna do either one of us any good. You need to tamp down that motherfucking temper of yours. You feel me? Get your head right, man. And next time you see one of them camera-toting motherfuckers, you don't say or do shit. You got that? Sure, T-Bone, I got it, Jack muttered a moment later, feeling as though his pride had just been thrashed. But that asshole had it coming. Shit, T-Bone, you weren't there, but I swear to God, that son of a bitch had it coming. I expect he did, Jackson, but man, you can't go acting out like that. What was the matter with you anyway? Were you drunk? No, fuck no, I wasn't drunk. I was fucking pissed. Yeah, and look at where it got you. This is part of what you're paying me for, to look after you. I want you to promise me you're not going to fuck up like this again. From now on, whenever you step out onto the street, just pretend that you're a friendly, law-abiding citizen. No more of this rough stuff. Who do you think you are, anyway, Jason Statham? So buckle up and fly right. Okay. Fucking hell, T-Bone. Read me the riot act, why don't you? Well, somebody's got to do it. Take care now. I got to handle another call. Early one afternoon at his office, Bernie received a call from the human resources head at an advertising and publicity agency. The woman who introduced herself as Arlene Schultzman explained that she had happened to glance at his resume, and of course she had followed this by finding his accompanying cover letter in her filing cabinet, and she then had taken quick note of one or two of Bernie's more inventive turns of phrase. At that point, she went on to explain she decided to call him so that she could schedule him in for an interview. Feeling happily surprised by her call, Bernie mentioned that he was tied up tomorrow, but he'd be out of the office on Friday afternoon when he was to meet up with a location scout from an independent film company he'd never dealt with before, nor had even come across before in print. He then went on to say that he expected to be free after 4 o'clock. She then asked if he would see her at 4:30, and of course he said that he would see her then. And now he had just been escorted by the department receptionist to Ms. Schultzman's office door, fully open, where the girl announced his arrival in a brisk high register. Miss Schultzman rose from her desk, and they greeted one another. She asked him straight away if he would care for anything to drink, to which he politely and quite sensibly declined. She invited him to sit down, and he lowered himself into the chair positioned directly in front of her desk. She began talking about the job qualifications and the company's expectation of the person who would hold the recently opened position of copywriter. This company, which my husband and I founded together, relies on the best talent we can find, Mr. Youngers. Now, do you believe you'd be up to the task, even though you've never done public relations work before? But here I must also say that you have a good deal of hands-on experience in dealing with an assortment of film-making companies, and I'm confident, that this background would serve you well here. But I'd like to hear you tell me how you would approach the job. Just remember that we not only develop ads for our stable of clients. Our purpose is to make them wary of one another as economic adversaries, all vying for the same thing in the end, the public's dollar. During the evening, a few hours following Theo's brief altercation at the Illinois bar, for which, although he didn't know it at the time, he'd been 86th, Erica happened to notice the abraded knuckles of his right hand where part of his fist had collided against that asshole Trump supporter's upper set of teeth after he had aimed at the shit-ass's nose. But he had been she had been watching Law and Order on Theo's large flat-screen TV, while Theo himself had been reading the newspaper, a nightly habit of his. What happened to your hand, Theo? And don't tell me you bunged it up out there in your man cave of a garage. You always wear those leather gloves of yours when you're working, so what happened? After a pause, Theo said, I had myself a bit of an altercation at the Illinois. You what? You got in a fight? That's right, Erica. You hit the nail right on the head. Oh, she said with uncompromising disgust. How could you? Do you think you're still 21, for God's sake? He was coming for me, Erica, so I gave him some fast business and left him there squirming on the floor. And then me and Sam walked on out. I'm surprised they didn't throw you out. What the hell were you thinking? This fucking backwoods inbred Trump supporter got in my face, and I set the fucking prick straight, Erica, that's all. Well, the last time I heard Mr. Bayfield, assault was still illegal. I don't expect a woman to understand this sort of thing. Oh, I understand it all right. I understand that beneath that working-class gentleman's act of yours, you're just another rude and crude hothead. Well, maybe so. Maybe so, she repeated with contempt. I know so. Octavia Hunterberg was the most stimulating woman Jack had ever met. Over the remaining few weeks of his stay as a guest at the luxurious Hunterberg residence in Beverly Hills, they had begun an affair. Octavia, with her contemporary European sensibility, after all, she had grown up in the great world metropolis of Vienna, the birthplace of Sigmund Freud's psychoanalytic theories, he based in part upon certain archetypes from Greek mythology, most famously the tragic life of Oedipus, eventual king of Thebes, whose murder of his father and marriage to his mother had been foretold by the blind soothsayer, Tiresias. Her tantalizing appearance with its ever-present sexual aura, her casual sophistication, and her intellect and imagination had all blended together in Jack's mind. He was drawn to her with an intense desire, yet he was also sometimes wary of her. At times she seemed to emanate a psychological influence over him which was considerable. In other words, she had mesmerized him. She would come to his newly acquired cozy bungalow, as she called it. After passing through Jack's front door for the first time, the stucco exterior and the red-orange ceramic tile roof lent the house a Mexican or Mediterranean air which appealed to her. This is perfect, Jack, quite perfect, but you need to do something about the decor. During those early rendezvous, when Octavia was, in Stephen's mind, off to another scheduled tennis date with one of her girlfriends, as he was inclined to believe, to the point where he had never even questioned the matter. Up to the time that she had met Jack, She had never allowed any of her occasional dalliances with younger men evolve into an affair. Stephen had grasped this early on when he'd begun to hear stories about Octavia after she'd rebuffed one of Stephen's house guests after the man's attempted play for a roll in the hay. Octavia had expected the privacy typically associated with and experienced in day-to-day domestic life. Not having known that after all of his 3 former wives, after divorcing all his 3 former wives, Stephen then took to inviting acquaintances of his to linger there, at their home now, as freeloading house guests. And she soon began to feel a mild animosity toward anyone who remained at their house longer than a single night. Yet, on occasion, these stories about Octavia would get back to Stephen, who had a reputation of being thoroughly laissez-faire toward his wife's conduct. And he expected the same casual attitude from his wife, which he received from her. But it was a matter of indifference to Octavia, who Stephen happened to be fucking. She had soon come to terms with and accepted the notion that Stephen no longer appeared drawn to her, and since his profession as a film producer guaranteed that an endless stream of young women would pass through his orbit each and every workday, but then, as far as she could tell, Stephen's workday and his social life were inextricably woven together. She just didn't care anymore. To her, American women took ages to mature. Some of them, perhaps most of them, wanted to be regarded as a girl for her entire life. Beginning a new job is never a breeze, and Bernie knew this all too well. Having changed jobs as he had done in the past about every 5 years, he had to acclimate himself to his new unfamiliar surroundings. The rest of the people who worked for this public relations agency. Arlene's husband turned out to be at least 10 years older than she was and appeared to have only a nominal role in its day-to-day operations, and indeed seemed to merely visit the office at the odd moment, as though Bernie thought he were performing some random inspection. Bernie judged that Derek Schultzman was in his mid-60s, and this gentleman with an air of preoccupation about him, something, Bernie reflected, that seemed off somehow. There was a kind of listless detachment which he projected, as though he were strolling through an exhibit at a museum rather than his own flourishing public relations company. So after Arlene introduced him to Bernie when he dropped in one day, not long after Bernie's arrival at the firm, she explained that her husband had been diagnosed as having a rare neurological disorder. She didn't specify. "Oh, these days he always looks a bit dozy," she remarked. In the meantime, after about a month into the job, Bernie said to Sheila one day, "Well, sweetheart, I believe we're about ready to go out house hunting now in a serious way." "I've made a list," Sheila said. "I hope this search doesn't turn out to be endless. One of my girlfriends sells real estate, and she's promised me she would keep an eye out for a nice place that we can afford. But one time she told me that some of her more fussy clients can wind up looking at over 50 houses before they finally make up their minds to buy a particular house." "I've read," Bernie returned, "that for most people buying a house can be one of the most stressful experiences in their lives. But you can see why, surely," she said. "I mean, you're sinking all this money into a place you intend to remain at for years to come. It's a big deal, Bernie." "I know it's a big deal, and that's why we're going to make our decision after some thorough consideration. Can you imagine paying $500,000 on a house you later